So I'm Kirsty Lewis. I'm a Climate Security Science Manager at the Met Office Hadley Centre.
Oh, that's okay.
It's okay.
Okay, what are you worried about, concerned about?
So my area of work is looking at how climate change affects food security, particularly for the most vulnerable, so the hungriest people. And I've been doing some work with the World Food Programme where we sort of integrated the climate science from the Met Office Hadley Centre and our climate modelling capability to understand the physical impacts, if you like, and integrating those with expertise on food security. So the World Food Programme, of course, feeds people and responds to crises, and they're interested in knowing how climate change might affect the frequency, the intensity and the types of food security incidents we might see in the future as a result of climate change.
And have you any solutions?
So what we wanted to do was to understand what the negotiations here really mean for food security. So we looked at the difference between if we mitigate, so if we tackle climate change, keep it to 2 degrees, or if we don't tackle the causes of climate change and it goes above 4 degrees. So if you like, mitigation is one solution we looked at. We also wanted to understand, of course, people won't do nothing in the face of changing climate, they will try to adapt, and so we looked at scenarios of adaptation as well. And what we wanted to know was whether if we don't mitigate against climate change, what will happen if we do nothing. If we don't do anything about tackling climate change, but at least we try to adapt, how that will affect food security. And what we saw is if we do nothing at all, food security or vulnerability to food insecurity, so food insecurity as a result of flood and drought shocks, gets considerably worse, really across the globe for everyone. If you adapt, it's better, but really we can't keep pace with climate change if we do nothing to tackle it at all. So in a 4-degree world, food insecurity, we see it in our climate models getting worse because just isn't enough we can't do enough adaptation, So we looked at the other solution was, well, what if we mitigate? We keep climate change to 2 degrees. We talk about being a safe limit, but what does it really mean? So if we only mitigate, what we see is food security does get worse in the near term because we're actually committed to quite a lot of climate change. Greenhouse gases last a long time in the atmosphere. But then after that, because it's stabilised at 2 degrees, things don't get any further worse. And then we looked at the adaptation scenario. So we do mitigate, we keep climate change to 2 degrees. Can we adapt to that? And actually what we found was that adaptation is sufficient if we limit climate change, so we can keep pace with it. So food security doesn't deteriorate by the 2050s. And actually as climate stabilises, further adaptation means that we see improvements on the present day. So there is actually a good news solution story there, which is if we both mitigate, we keep climate change to 2 degrees, and we do all we can to adapt to those changes we're already committed to, we can see improvements in food security. But if we do nothing, the outlook is very dire.
How soon?
Well, we're looking at long-term climate change. So, of course, climate variability already affects food insecurity, and we still need to do efforts to protect ourselves against the natural variability of weather. So we'll see that today. And, of course, we've already seen quite a bit of climate change. So it's a problem for today, really. But in terms of how we mitigate, we need to start doing that immediately if we want to have that long-term impact. And similarly, we need to adapt from today.
What would be your preferred mitigation method?
I suppose as a climate scientist, it's really out of my room to tell people what they should do to tackle climate change. Really, for me, it's to say that if you do this is what will happen if you do that. And we need to be sort of the honest brokers, if you like, about what's the physics of what's happening, what's the reality. But I wouldn't really want to comment on what politicians should do as a method. Yeah.
Have you taken into consideration the underwater of the coastal plains?
So what we looked at was specifically floods and droughts, so we didn't look at coastal areas. So there's lots of additional things we could look at, for example, CO2 fertilisation, change in average yield, coastal areas. We haven't looked at that at the moment, but that would be the next step, I think, to look at that. And we'd also be quite interested to look at trade as well, how we can perhaps manage some of the risks of food insecurity by trading between worse hit and better hit areas.
And did you look at the impact of eating of battery farmed meat, which is very, very food intensive?
Yeah. So we didn't look at that either, but it's clearly that as we see a growing population and climate putting more stress on food security systems, we need to be clever about the way that we eat. And of course, eating meat and animals is quite food intensive. That's food that we could be eating ourselves. So we didn't include any of that average change. We were just looking at the sort of shocks to food security systems.